Hello, Pastor Joel here from Chico First. And the Bible holds the unfolding story of God's involvement in our world. And the theme of God's kingdom provides us with a way of entering and following this story. And in every kingdom, there's a dwelling place for the king. And throughout much of the Old Testament, the tabernacle was the place where God dwelled with Israel. And while the tabernacle was among God's people, though it wasn't open to them, in fact, even Moses couldn't enter when the cloud of God's glory settled upon it. Then, once Jerusalem had become the capital of the land, the tabernacle tent was replaced by a permanent building, the temple. And here was God, the king of his people, dwelling in the capital city of his people and their land. But still, the way to him was blocked by the curtain that separated the most holy place with the rest of the temple. And then the Word became flesh and literally tabernacled among us. In the New Testament, we discover that just as the people of old looked to the tabernacle for an encounter with God, we look to a person, God Himself, who was in human flesh and lived among us. John's language specifically communicates that God in Jesus dwelled among His people physically and now dwells in His people by His Spirit. God is among us. Jesus, in other words, is the true tabernacle. And this is what he was explaining when he cleansed the temple by driving out the merchants and money changers who had set up shop there. He was challenged about his authority to do all of that. And he answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And John tells us that after Jesus was crucified, he was buried and rose from the dead, his disciples understood that he was speaking about the temple of his own body. When Jesus died, the curtain in the temple tore, signifying that through Jesus we now have unrestricted access to God, but also showing that the temple building was now obsolete, for its fulfillment had come in Jesus. And if we want to meet with God, we must go to Jesus. We no longer need a specific building. God meets his people when we're gathered and when we're scattered, not in places, but in the person of his Son, the true temple. And so, wherever you are and whatever you are up to, there is nothing and no one standing between you and a living encounter with the Holy God. The King dwells in you today if you have accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. God bless.